Path Goal Theory Sequel. We can credit path goal theory for awakening leadership researchers to the moderating role of environmental factors on the relationship between leaders and followers. Some other interesting theoretical ideas have evolved from this approach. Kerr and Germier, 1978, developed the substitutes for leadership concept. In the tradition of path goal theory, Kerr and Germier argued that the leader's function is complementary, that is, to provide for subordinates direction or support that is missing in the environment. Examples, structure for ambiguous task. If the environment already supplies that resource, the leader's behavior becomes unnecessary and will have little effect on the subordinate reactions. For example, explicit job descriptions or comprehensive training could reduce the value of the leader's structuring behavior for clarifying the subordinate's task. Similarly, supportive and structuring behavior for clarifying the subordinate. Similarly, supportive and closely knit work groups might substitute for the positive emotional effects of a supervisor's consideration. Also, features of the situation can have the effect of neutralizing any impact that the leader might have. For example, rigid organizational policies or technology-determined work patterns could render ineffectual any attempts at leadership influence. An extensive test of the substitutes concept was recently completed by Podsakoff, Neoff, and McKenzie and Williams, 1993. The substitutes measuring instruments were improved and administered to over 600 people, including MBA students and employees in 3 organizations, a university, an insurance company, and a gas transmission company. The results indicated that although some of the reputed substitutes, task characteristics, work team cohesiveness, did have strong effects on subordinate psychological states, the effects of leadership were neither replaced nor neutralized. The strength of the relationship between leader behavior and subordinate outcomes was affected very little by the presence or absence of hypothesized substitutes. A reasonable criticism of the substitutes for leadership concept is that it gives too little attention to the interpersonal and emotional aspects of the leader-follower relationship. For example, Chemers and Cunningham, 1989, found that subordinates value the feedback that they get from their superior above all other potential sources, including feedback from the task itself. Workers in a medium-sized computer company were asked to rate the quality of positive and corrective feedback they received from their superior, from their peers, and from the task itself. Feedback from a superior had the strongest effect on a worker's job satisfaction, even in cases where intrinsic features of the task provided effective and timely feedback. The substitute's reasoning, however, should alert leadership researchers to the recognition that subordinate needs and reactions occur within and are affected by a group of organizational context. Despite the powerful impact of leadership on an organizational functioning, it is important to recognize the limits of leadership effects. Another important set of hypotheses instigated by path goal reasoning were presented in House's 1977 theory of charismatic leadership. That work is discussed with related charismatic and transformational theories of leadership in Chapter 6. The contingency approach to decision-making. The third major contingency theory in terms of broad impact is the normative decision model, first developed by Vroom and Yetton in 1973. This model deals with decisions that affect a whole group or team and was later expanded by Vroom and Yago, 1974, to include decisions involving individual subordinates. The total body of work is referred to here as the Vroom-Yetton-Yago model. Vroom and his colleagues maintain that one of a leader's important prerogatives is controlling the process by which decisions are made. Their model aims to be both prescriptive, i.e. normative, in specifying the parameters that determine what kinds of decision processes should be used, and descriptive, amassing data on the kinds of processes that leaders actually do employ. One guiding principle of the model was provided by Mayer's 1963 observations that high levels of subordinate participation in decision-making increase commitment, but are costly in time and effort. A second general principle is that the quality of a decision is dependent on the quality of the information that contributes to the decision. From these starting points, the Vroom-Yago model expanded to include a range of decision strategies to be considered a set of situational parameters and to be guided by a list of rules designated to protect the eventual decision from various deficiencies. The decision strategies range across the dimension of the 3 degrees of subordinate participation and fall into 3 general categories: autocratic, consultative, and group, democratic. The decision model for the groups include 5 strategies. Autocratic 1, in which the group leader makes the decision alone using available information. Autocratic 2, in which the leader obtains information from subordinates but makes the decision alone. Consultative 1, in which the leader shares the problem with each subordinate, separately seeking information and advice but reserving the decision authority. Consultative 2, which follows the same general pattern except that subordinates are consulted as a group, and Group 2, in which the leader fully shares the problem with subordinates in a group setting and invites them to participate fully and equally in decision-making. In the individual model, in which the decision affects only one subordinate, the consultative Group 2 and Group 2 styles involving groups are dropped, and a Group 1 strategy, that is, participative decision-making with a single subordinate, is added. Also added in the individual model is a delegative strategy, in which the superior gives the subordinate relevant information and allows the subordinate autonomy in the decision-making. The situational parameters that must be considered in choosing the appropriate decision strategy are embedded in 8 questions. These questions address whether the leader and/or the subordinates have the necessary information to make a high-quality decision, whether the subordinates are likely to be supportive of the decision and committed to the successful execution, and whether there is conflict among the subordinates about the most desirable solution. The conditions reflected in these questions are elegantly melded to the possible decision strategies by a set of rules and embodied in a decision tree flowchart. For a detailed explanation, see Vroom and Yago 1974. The 12 rules can be reduced to 6 principles of leadership. One, if you do not have enough information to make a good decision, you must get the information from somewhere. 2, if the information that you have is not sufficiently structured to facilitate a clear decision, you need to seek advice and help to clarify and structure the problem. 3, if you need the acceptance and commitment of followers to implement the decision and you're not sure you have that acceptance, you must involve the followers in participative decision-making to enlist acceptance. 4, if followers are not committed to the organizational goals embedded in the problem, they cannot be allowed to make the decision, although their advice should be sought and considered. 5, if followers are in conflict over the most desirable solution, they must be brought together to allow them to air their opinion before a decision is made. 6, followers should be represented, that is, solicited and heard about decisions that affect them. The situational parameters subjected to guiding rules yield is what's called the feasible set of decision strategies. These are all the decision strategies that do not violate any of the rules. A particular situation might be that several strategies are acceptable. A leader can then choose which strategy to use by choosing the most acceptable autocratic strategy if time and efficiency are important considerations, or the most democratic strategy if the development of the subordinate talent takes priority over efficiency. Vroom and his colleagues reported that descriptive data reflecting the actual usage of the decision strategies in varying leadership situations. Much of this data was collected in workshops in which attending managers were asked to to either respond to standard problems or to recall a recent decision and describe its characteristics. Vroom, 1980, recounted that managers reported choosing a decision strategy within the feasible set about 2/3 of the time. When they did not choose an acceptable strategy, they were much more likely to violate the rules governing acceptance and commitment of subordinates than they were the rules of governing information quality. In other words, they were more likely to fail to consider the subordinate acceptance when they were thought they knew what the correct situation was when they were unsure of their information or structure. Predictive validity. If leaders sometimes act in accordance with the prescriptions of the Vroom-Yenton-Yago model and sometimes do not, the question arises as to the relative effectiveness of the decisions made. A number of studies have been done to address the question of validity of the model, but all of them are characterized by relatively weak methodologies for addressing the question. Vroom and Yago reported the results of a number of studies that involved asking managers to recall a past decision to describe the situational parameters and the decision strategy chosen and to rate the overall effectiveness of the decision. The recollections indicated that decisions that are the feasible set have about twice the rate of success as decisions outside the set. In a somewhat different approach, Margeryson and Gloob, 1979, asked a group of managers to respond to the Vroom and Yenton, 1973, standard problems and computed a score for how much each manager was in agreement with the model. The researchers then obtained superior supervisor satisfaction ratings of these managers by their subordinates. Managers' level of agreement with the model was quite positively correlated with subordinate satisfaction. A similar study by Paul and Ibaldi, 1989, divided a sample of service industry supervisors into groups whose answers to the standard problems were in high or low agreement with the model. The subordinates of the high agreement supervisors were found to have significantly higher productivity and job satisfaction than those of the low agreement supervisors. Although these studies do not assess actual leader behavior, the results do imply that better managers at least know the right answers. In the most careful study to date, Field and House, 1990, interviewed a group of managers about their most recent decision, collecting the managers' ratings of the key features of the decision quality, subordinate acceptance, and overall decision effectiveness. The research team also interviewed a subordinate of each manager. After the subordinate recognized the particular decision in the question, they responded to the same descriptive and evaluated questions as the managers. The manager and subordinate descriptions showed relatively high agreement on most features. However, a few important discrepancies occurred. The manager's ratings of decision effectiveness indicated that the decisions inside the feasible set were significantly more effective than decisions outside the set, although the absolute level of difference was quite moderate. However, the subordinate ratings of decision effectiveness showed no advantage for the decisions inside the feasible set compared to those outside. One possible explanation for this effect concerns the relationship of subordinate participation to the ratings of effectiveness. In the manager's ratings, participation and effectiveness were uncorrelated, as predicted by the contingency tenets of the model. That is, the effectiveness of participation depends on the situation. For the subordinates, however, participation was positively small r equals 0.30. P-value is greater than 0.05, correlated with the rating of overall effectiveness. Understandably, subordinates highly value their own input. A similar result was reported by Heilman, Hornstein, Cage, and Hirschlag in an experimental study. Subjects were asked to read Vroom and Yenton model case descriptions and rate the probable effectiveness of the decision strategies used. Subjects were asked to take the perspective of either a superior or a subordinate of the manager in question. When in the role of superior, subjects' ratings of effectiveness closely followed the model's prescriptions, but when in the role of subordinates, the subjects rated participative behavior equal in effectiveness to the autocratic behavior prescribed by the model. The disagreement between the model's prescriptions and the subordinate's perspective may be irrelevant. Autocratic behavior is only prescribed by the model under the conditions where the subordinate acceptance is assured or unnecessary. It may be quite an acceptable trade-off to tolerate a slightly disgruntled reaction among subordinates in order to garner the time and efficiency benefits offered by an appropriately autocratic strategy. On the other hand, subordinate reactions may be related to a long-term erosion of support for the leader that affects subsequent decision parameters and solution execution. The sort of retrospective or hypothetical methodology used in these studies without any objective data on actual effectiveness leaves the question moot. Another important question about the Vroom-Yenton-Yago model and other prescriptive models concerns the extent to which leaders are able to vary their behaviors to match situational parameters. Models like this one and the path-goal theory assume that leaders can easily change their behavior in accord with situational demands. In contrast, Fielder and Chemers represent leadership style as a personality trait or highly ingrained motivational pattern that is stable over time and not easily changeable. The empirical evidence is controversial. Vroom, 1980, reported that only 10% of the variance in managers' responses to his standard problems was contributed to by differences between managers, and the variance contributed to by difference between the problems was 3 to 5 times as great. However, Hill and Schmidt, 1977, reported individual differences in style. A program of research by Bass and his associates analyzed a large set of data relating decision styles to interpersonal, and organizational variables. One important finding of that research indicated that managers had a propensity to use one style or set of related styles more than others. That is, they showed individual differences reflecting stable patterns of usage of particular autocratic or participative styles. Further complexity is added to this question when one considers the trustworthiness of responses to 2 questionnaires. Thompson and Chemers, 1993, reported the results of 2 questionnaire studies in which managers were asked to report the likelihood that they would use popular decision styles or behaviors in various leadership situations. Half the managers were told that the purpose of the research was to examine common patterns of managers, whereas the other half was told that the study was about differences between male and female managers. The ratings given to various autocratic and democratic decision strategies or task and relationship-oriented behaviors varied dramatically from one condition to another. Responses revealed that managers were more self-conscious when they thought that gender issues were being studied. An important question raised by these studies is whether managers' responses in a questionnaire taken while attending a seminar on decision-making may not be very different from their actual behaviors in real-time work situation. The availability of managers to change their behaviors at will remains an empirical question.